Righty.
Okay, thank you for being with us today, Kirsten.
No problem. Thank you for having me on this cold day.
Kirsten is also a cottage fruit producer.
And a food handler. And she used to be with the, wasn't it the Minnesota Department of Health?
Yep. Long time ago.
Yep.
So I have a PowerPoint that I can try to share screen here. If it doesn't work very well, then I can send it to Jennifer and maybe she can send it to the participants if people would like that.
It should work.
Okay.
Yep. Perfect.
Okay. So
Yep.
I'm going to try that. Let's see. See if I can bring it up. Is anything coming up on your screen?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay.
If you want to forward it to me as well, I can forward it to Shelly and see if she can share it.
All right, here, let me try this. Share. Okay, now I've got it highlighted and now I'll see if it will share screen. Do you see it?
Perfect. Yep, it says you've started. I see it right there.
All right, so should I just go ahead and get started here?
Perfect.
Okay. Now I don't know how you want to handle this, but I will be talking about choosing the right business entity and concentrating mostly on limited liability companies, because I believe, without knowing any of you or having talked with any of you, that would probably be the best fit. I know Jennifer had LLC in the title when she put together the schedule, but I thought it would be worth touching base on a couple other things too, just to give folks something to think about.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. And then if you've got questions, I'll leave plenty of time to answer. Hopefully, if I don't get to questions, or if you think of questions afterwards, my contact information is in the PowerPoint. And so just get a hold of me, email, phone, whatever works for folks. Okay.
Fantastic. And what we're also having people do is if they have questions now, we'll have them throw them in the chat box so we can see if they get answered during your presentation or if we need to address them at the end too.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, as Jennifer said, my name's Kirsten Libby. I own Libby Law Office. I've got offices in both Scandia, Minnesota, and in St. Paul. I've been involved in food for quite some time. I was born and raised in small town South Dakota, so you know, you learn how to can when you learn how to walk in small town South Dakota. So I've been canning myself for a long time, and I have had various licenses over the years to do different things, kind of culminating in I own a small retail store in Scandia, and I am licensed there to sell my canned goods in the store. So I've worked with the Ag Department and the Health Department to go through that process, and that was quite time consuming and took a lot. But it was worth it. So I sell my stuff in my storefront. I also sit on the Scandia Farmers Market Board and participate in the Scandia Farmers Market. So it's the the whole food thing is an awesome place to be, especially in this day and age. And if we can keep ourselves in jars and rings and lids, we're going to be doing good. Okay. So as well as a food producer, I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for a long time, and a lot of what I do has to do with small businesses and forming legal entities. And so that's what we're looking at today. There are lots of decisions to make when you're choosing the right business structure. And you know, it's to be and how to be. Those are the first decisions that you're going to make. And given that you're in this seminar, it sounds like you've been thinking about it. And you know, to be, it's a monumental decision. You're going to stop dreaming. You're going to become legal, and you're going to figure out how to start a professional business. And fundamental to that are some of the steps we'll go through today. So let's just switch this here. Your entity choice is, you do that at the state level. You're governed by state law. I am, whether you're a Minnesota resident or a Wisconsin resident or want to do business in either state, where you form your business is where you're authorized to do it. So if you are a Minnesota business, but go over to Wisconsin and do some shows or some markets over there, technically you should also be registered as a foreign corporation in Wisconsin. Okay, so where you choose to form your business is where you are able to do your business. Okay, there are main categories, and the main categories are sole proprietors, partnerships, limited liability companies, and corporations. If you do not choose a category, the law chooses one for you. So for example, if you have not incorporated, the law sees you as a sole proprietor. So we are all something. And we'll get to the details of what these are in a little bit. But right now, I'm a limited liability company. My company is called Apothecary's Daughter, and it's an LLC registered to do business in Minnesota. Okay. Previous to that, I was a sole proprietor, selling jams and jellies at the farmer's market. So when you are looking to choose what kind of business entity you want to be, you want to look at, you know, what kind of liability do you carry? How do you want to be taxed? And part of that goes into how long do you expect this business to last? Going through creating a business can be, I mean, it'll cost you some money, and you'll have to do things every year to keep your business structure alive, and you also have to respect your business. That is what provides you the liability protection. So if you're going to form a business, you want to know what you're doing, and you want to pay attention to the corporate formalities so you can keep those liability protections. And the more complex you are, the more complex your capital structure will be. Capital structure is, you know, what kind of money do you put in to fund it? What kind of equipment's in there? What is your business own? And who can be an owner? Different business entities have different ownership requirements and different structures. Taxation choices, you can have pass-through. Pass-through is where you file it on your personal return, or you take a distribution directly as an individual. And that entails, you know, you can do a pass-through on a Schedule C if you're a limited liability company, or you can take a S Corp distribution if you decide to be a corporation. Double taxation typically happens if you're a C Corp, and I can't imagine anybody in this industry needing to be a C Corp. That's usually for big public corporations. Rates and changes in law. It's one thing if you're going to be a business structure, the laws change over the years. Limited liability companies just had a huge rewrite a couple of years ago. And basically came into conformity with the rest of the country. So we'll talk about that a little further. Lots of choices. There's sole proprietorship. That is if you are just you, one owner. And through that, and if there are two of you and you haven't incorporated, you're a general partnership. Like I said earlier, the law will categorize you as something. So unincorporated, that's what that means. You haven't incorporated, but the law has recognized you as a general partner if there are two of you, and sole proprietorship if there is one of you. Okay. Sole proprietorship, you're liable for all your debts and obligations, and this is what I'm assuming most of you are now. You own your own company, you make your food, and you take your food out and sell it. And you take all your millions and spend them during the winter, right? So typically it's one person. You're not employed by the company. You earn your money. You can deduct your expenses. The big thing about being a sole proprietor is there is no liability shield. You are liable for all expenses, all debts, totally naked in the legal world. Okay. This is something I would never recommend for anybody, ever. And then you keep track of your expenses, you keep track of your income, and you can then file that on Schedule C of your taxes. Okay. General partnership, same thing. It's the same as a sole proprietor, except there are two of you. C Corps, I'm not going to spend any time on C Corps. They're big. They're for big corporations, especially corporations that are looking to go public at some point. Okay. S Corp is not a bad place to be. There's some, you only have one class of stock, no more than 100 shareholders. After limited liability company, S Corps are probably the second most chosen corporate form. And I should say corporation, the S is just a tax designation. Okay. Domestic limited partnership, limited liability partnership, and limited liability limited partnership. We don't use these anymore. We mostly go to LLCs if we're going to do something in this structure, but I put it out there just so you have an idea of what we have available. Okay. So domestic limited liability companies, and for our purposes, that will be a Minnesota limited liability company. Everything having to do with this company, you'll find in Minnesota Statute 322C. Professional firms will not pertain to you. Professional firms are for accountants and lawyers, and typically you designate PLLC if you're going to be a professional limited liability company. Okay. So limited liability companies were brought into being probably in the early 90s. Previous to that, there was only corporations available if you wanted to incorporate. And if you didn't want to incorporate, then you were a partnership. Remember, no legal liability shield in a partnership. It was an unincorporated business entity. So when the powers that be put together limited liability companies, what they attempted to do was to take the best of the corporate world and the best of the partnership world and merge them, putting together a template for smaller businesses. That was the intent when these things were put together in the 90s. And since the 90s, it's become the number one business entity in use. Okay. There's several different ways. Well, there's several different ways that you can manage a limited liability company. You can manage as a member. You are the member. It's similar to what a shareholder would be in a corporation. You're a member, you own units. Units are similar to shares in a corporation, and you can bifurcate in a limited liability company governance, decision making, and the distribution of profits and losses. You can't do that in a corporation. And frankly, most people don't take advantage of that, but it's there if need be, and it's a good advantage of the LLC. So you are taxed as a partnership unless you elect to be taxed as a C Corp or an S Corp. Okay, so you form your company and you have the legal liability shield, then you decide how you want to be taxed. For our purposes, for our 1 or 2 person LLCs, given regular level of income for food makers, you're probably going to be taxed just as a partnership. That means it will be a Schedule C on your individual tax return. Okay, or if there are 2 of you and it's a partnership, you can do a separate partnership return. Multiple classes of membership interests, probably not for this conversation today, but it allows for some complexity there. You can have as many members as you want. Members are owners, remember, and there's no restrictions on who can be a member. There are in corporations. For our purposes, any body can be a member. If you want another company to be a member, that can happen as well in LLCs. Okay, so it looks like I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So in corporations, you have shareholders, directors, officers. In LLCs, you have members, governors, and managers. Okay, so I don't know how familiar some of you are with corporate structure, but there's a lot of analogies between LLCs and corporations. And oops. So some of the general rules of thumb is if you're going to work exclusively for the entity, an S Corp might be a good choice because you can take your distribution and it's a better tax advantage than maybe doing it at a personal level. Real estate holdings, I don't know how many of you own your own real estate for your company, or and I bring some of this up because also as you're looking forward, you may want to have some of these things in mind as you're looking at a business entity structure now. Okay, so it's both for today and in looking towards the future. Okay. If you're going to incorporate, for a corporation, you would file articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State's office. For a limited liability company, you file articles of organization. And then your bylaws are really your operating agreement. And the operating agreement typically follows state law, and it sets out how you're going to do business as a corporate, as a limited liability company. And when I form a company for a client, I usually will do their articles of organization. I'll do their operating agreement. Used to be an operating agreement and a control agreement, but is now an operating agreement only. They've kind of merged them. And then I typically will put together the first meeting minutes of the board. That's the kind of stuff you take to the bank to get your bank account open. It's the kind of stuff that they'll want to see. Who are the officers, and those officers are elected in that first meeting. So the articles of incorporation have to do with a corporation. And so I'm going to go down to the limited liability company stuff. So you will have this if you want to think about a corporation instead of a limited liability company. But let's just go down to the LLC. Okay, here we go. As we talked about, it is derived from partnership law. Best of both worlds, limited liability company, taking corporate good stuff and partnership good stuff and putting it together in its own chapter of law. 322C, fairly new law, the way it is now. For an LLC, we filed the Articles of Organization with the Secretary of State's office, and those articles will contain the name of your business. It needs an address for a registered office, and you also are required to have an organizer. The organizer could be me as your lawyer, it could be you yourself, but you need those three things to form this company with the Secretary of State. I have optional here, operating agreement. I don't think it's optional. There are very, very few instances where I would say go ahead and put your company together without an operating agreement. For me, having an operating agreement is what makes you professional. It also lends credence to your business. So these articles of organization are filed with the Secretary of State's office. It costs about $165 to file those, and then you will renew those annually. If you're lucky, you'll get an email from the Secretary of State's office that says, hey, it's time to renew. You click on a button, you renew, and it's that easy. Or if for some reason they lose your email, you'll have to remember to do it, because if you don't, they will dissolve you. So the operating agreement is really the bylaws of your business, put together according to Chapter 322C. This new law that we have says you can have an oral operating agreement, written or implied. As a lawyer, lawyers like to see things in writing. It should be your guidebook to how you're going to do your business. So I like to see it in writing, number one, so people know, so you know, so when you forget, you have a place to go look and try and figure out what you're supposed to do. It's there for you. It governs the relationship among the members. It gives you rights, it gives you duties, and it lays out the capacity of the people. And if you are a single member LLC, you're probably wearing a couple of different hats. You may be the chief financial officer with one hat, you may be the chief manager with another hat. So with those hats, you're going to have different rights, responsibilities, duties, and obligations. So you'll pay attention to those. So if you think, oh, it's just me, why do I need all this stuff? Again, it goes to making your business professional. It lends credence to it when you go out into the public, when you go to the bank, or if you want to expand. It gives you just that next level coming out of the kitchen. Okay. The company can be managed 3 different ways now. You can have a member managed. That is where you're the only person in the game, and so you're the only member, and so you manage accordingly as the member. Okay. Or you can have a manager managed. Probably banks, the world is most used to seeing manager managed or board managed limited liability companies. Manager managed is where you name a chief financial officer, where you name a chief financial manager, you name a chief manager, and those 2 titles carry with them the duties and responsibilities. Okay. You can also be managed by a board, and the board acts through board actions. I imagine most of you are familiar with how boards work, if you've sat on one or whatever. So those are the 3 ways that you can be managed in an LLC. Member managed, manager managed, or board managed. Probably the most of the ones that I do are either either the second one or the third one, either manager managed or board managed. So financial rights and governance rights. I stated earlier that it's the nice part about the limited liability company is you could bifurcate those rights. You can't do that in a corporation. So say you've got somebody who has cash, but has not really the know-how to make food, for example. Or you've got somebody who's really good at the food making but has no money. And so you want to, if you want to recognize those interests differently, you can do that. And you can do that by, instead of saying, we're going to split everything 50-50, and by everything I mean all of the losses or all of the money 50-50, you can split it 60-40, 30-70. You can do it that way, the distribution of profits and losses. Or you can say, you know, I want to be in charge of this thing. I'm okay with you bringing some money in, but I want to be able to make the decisions. You can also bifurcate the governance decisions, where somebody could bring money in and you'll split that money 50-50, but the other person wants to run the show. And so they want to be in charge of the decision making. They can do that by keeping a greater percentage of the decision making authority. Okay. Dissenters' rights are something that is very, very important in limited liability companies and in corporations. I think the size that we're talking about with some of the food makers here won't make a big difference to us right now. This is something, as you get more sophisticated within your business, it's something that you'll want to know about. And so I put it there for you to maybe do some later research on or understand at another time. Okay. So if you are a member of a company, you carry with you the duty of loyalty, the duty of care, contractual obligation of good faith and fair dealing. And those are something you cannot rid yourself of by writing them out of your operating agreement. The idea being that you're a member of this company, you're going to be loyal to the company, you're going to care for that company, you are going to take care of the obligations when you're dealing with others under the name of your company. Might seem like, you know, of course, but you'd be surprised at how many conflicts operate out there. And so that is something that you should hold near and dear to your heart. Hey, I'm going to create this company. It's going to be mine. I'm going to tend to it like a child or a pet, or, you know, I love this thing because God knows you'll be a slave to it. And why do you do all of that? Why do you go through all of it? So you can be indemnified if something goes awry. And so that is, if you act like a member and you give the duty of care, you give the duty of loyalty, the company will indemnify you as to any acts that you might be being litigated against. Okay. The litigation piece of it is, if you're a sole proprietor and somebody sues you, whether it's a bad food, or, I mean, obviously the worst thing that could happen is somebody dies of botulism, right? If you're canning food, and somebody brings a wrongful death action against you. As a sole proprietor, everything that you own personally is up for grabs in that case. Okay, that's the worst case scenario. We all talk in worst case scenarios. If you're a limited liability company and you have treated your company like a company and you have adhered to the corporate formalities, if the worst thing ever happens, you can still be sued, no doubt, but what the limit of your liability is what the company is worth. Okay, so that's the huge deal here. You want to shield yourself. You want to limit that liability. Okay. And that's kind of a lot of the gist. I want to touch on a couple other things that so far you've created your company, you've acted with all the corporate formalities, which allows you to limit your liability. It allows the company to indemnify you if somebody goes after you personally. And you've gone through the expense of creating it. Okay. So once you've gone through the expense of creating it, then you're going to be subject to government regulations. You'll be subject to different tax considerations. And once you have formed it, then you're going to have some post-organization issues. And those are things like getting your federal and state ID, employee identification number. It's a separate entity. So again, remember, different hats. So you'll need a state tax number, and many of you probably already have one. But if you've got an employee or employees, then you'll have to get you'll have to file your employment taxes. So that's a different account. You'll have to file your sales tax like you do now with the Minnesota Department of Revenue. So you'll set up books, which many of you keep in probably one way, shape, or form now. And then you'll do this annually. As far as renewing your business, you'll do annually, and then your workers' comp and your sales tax and use and all of that type of stuff you'll do, depending on your business. There are different levels. So that is where we are. So I've left a lot of time for questions. Since this is so new, I figured there would be questions. And if not, then we can talk about whatever you want to.
We do have a couple of questions already. The first, Kirsten, would you be willing to share the PowerPoint with me so I could create a PDF for people?
Absolutely.
They're asking if you can have a copy of it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Melissa asks here, do you need a lawyer to drop your articles of organization, operating agreement, and bylaws? And also, what is a fair estimate on what it would cost to have an attorney draw that up for you?
I'm going to say, as a lawyer, so I don't mean to sound too self-interested here, but yes, you need a lawyer. You can go to the Secretary of State's website and you can file some articles. You can pay your fee and boom, you're a company. Okay. I would never, ever, ever recommend doing that. I think it's a huge disservice by the Secretary of State's office to even offer this, because the most important thing about you creating a business is understanding what you're doing. You can pull operating agreements off of the internet. They may or may not work for you. So unless you know, I would say don't use them, because one of my firm beliefs in representing small businesses and creating business entities is that I want to, in my practice, create an environment where over the years, people know when to come to me. They don't come to me too soon because it just costs them money. I don't want them to come to me too late because it costs them money. But as they get comfortable with their documents, as they get comfortable with the language in the documents, then they call and say, hey, I have this thing percolating. I think I need to have a conversation. So that's the value that I believe a lawyer can bring to the table. The maker is going to know their stuff. They're going to know their stuff much more than most lawyers. Okay, I might be an exception there just because I'm a maker too. But the lawyer will be able to help you understand the documents that you're signing. That is the big thing, the big value that I think a good lawyer in this industry brings to the table. So no, I don't recommend that you just pull stuff off the internet or do it on your own. And what was the second part of that question?
Just an estimate average of what it costs for somebody to have all these documents drawn up and start this and start the LLC from an attorney fee.
From an attorney fee perspective, in the industry, something like this can probably cost up to about $2,500. Okay.
Okay.
I
And
don't.
is that if,
Huh?
sorry. I would say, is that if you have members, then multiple members and stuff, or does it cost more the more members you have, or is it just the documents themselves?
Every lawyer gets to bill and charge how he or she wants to.
Yep.
From what I understand from my clients, if it's a fairly simple process with not a lot of members, maybe up to $2,500. I've never charged that much to form a corporation or a limited liability company for my new clients, mostly because mostly because I want to develop that relationship where they can come to me and have questions. And if they spend every last dime that they've ever had to form the corporation and don't feel like they can call me because it always costs an arm and a leg, that defeats the purpose, I believe, in offering this as a service. So I typically charge probably about $750 to $1,000 to form corporations for my new clients, unless it gets out of hand, and then I talk about it with them. If I've got a client who I've spent hours and hours with, then I may need to up it a little bit. But that gives me a couple hours to spend with clients, a couple hours to do the documents, and I've always felt that was a good deal on both ends.
Gotcha. Okay, this next question is going to be multifold, and this is something that's kind of near to our hearts too. Is get to piercing the corporate veil. So somebody here asks, they've seen and heard people discussing the benefits of LLCs on open forums, and often someone will respond with they aren't helpful. Just ask a lawyer how hard it is to pierce the veil of the LLC. What are the mistakes and risks that weaken the protection of the LLC? And that's something as an association we've even dealt with after having the law passed, because we were going to be required to use our individual names on the labels regardless if you were an LLC. So that's something that since the law took effect, we have tirelessly had conversations with numerous people, both at the department, politicians, so on and so forth. The MDA did eventually come to the agreement that if you are an LLC, there is no need to put your name on that label. We had actually consulted with an attorney to come up with creative ways to create product labels that wouldn't pierce the corporate veil. But we were also very much so advised that we need to make some changes so that the intent of the law is followed. So I'll be quiet and I'll let you answer.
Well, if I'm looking to pierce the corporate veil, the number one thing I look at is, how do you hold yourself out? Do you hold yourself out as Apothecary's Daughter, LLC? Well, that tells me that you are a company that's formed probably in Minnesota, if that's where we are, and you have all the protections of law. If I hold myself out as Kirsten Libby, yippee skippy, there are no corporate protections there. And so I'm very glad that you pursued and prevailed on that discussion with the ag departments, because that's insane. It's, yeah, how do you hold yourself out? So you're piercing the corporate veil. You hold yourself out as Kirsten Libby, well, I want your personal bank account number then, right? If I hold myself out as apothecary's daughter, I've got a business bank account. I keep my business and my personal life separate. I have receipts. I have a credit card in my company's name. I have a bank account in my company's name. I have vendor accounts in my company's name. And so that is how you prevent the corporate veil from being pierced. You create and you maintain that separate entity
under
for
all
the public.
circumstances.
Yeah.
So, because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you form that LLC or corporation, whatever you choose to do so, you are no longer an individual. You are that company, and that company has one responsible person or however many responsible persons. So whenever you apply for a bank account, you apply for a license, you apply for whatever it may be, you are the responsible, whoever signs for that LLC is the responsible party and will sign any application. You'll fill it out as the LLC, but you will sign it as the responsible party for that LLC, correct?
Sure. The chief manager, the chief financial officer. Yes, that's your job as a member of the LLC. It's not your job as Jennifer. It's your job as Jennifer, the manager of the LLC. So
Yes.
absolutely. Because
I'm no longer the person who, I am maybe the person who's baking, but I'm not the person who is, I'm just the live body doing it. It's the corporation that's actually selling the product.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And, and that is how you build what we call goodwill in your company. So let's say you're wildly successful and everybody in the world loves your pickled beets and they only buy Jennifer's pickled beets. That gives your company value. So if you reach a point where your company has value and you can sell your company, that goodwill is worth something.
Exactly.
So, yes.
Okay. So then how are some of the ways you can pierce the corporate veil then?
You use your own checking account. You write checks on your own checking account for business purposes. That's the biggest thing, is the mixing of business and personal. That's how you pierce.
Okay. And then that'd be the same thing with doing business with people. They need to know they're doing business with that company, not that person. Because
that's right.
By default, you're going to associate whoever you're purchasing things from to that company, but it's still that company you're doing work for. Okay.
Yep. So that's the big thing. You hand out business cards. My business cards certainly have my name on there, but my logo for Libby Law Office or Apothecary's Daughter, that's the hat I'm wearing today. I'm Libby Law today. Tomorrow I might be Apothecary's Daughter. I'm always Kirsten. But yep. Whose hat am I operating under today?
Okay. Let me keep reading here. Let me make sure I get all of the questions here because they're starting to pour in. So I saw that LLCs for cottage producers do not offer the same protection as a small business. Is that true?
No, LLC, if you are an LLC, you will get all of the protections of law under Chapter 322C in Minnesota. And they do. Small business can be a single member LLC, all the way up to unlimited number of members. But as long as you are adhering to your corporate formalities, you are going to get all of those protections in law, no matter what your size is.
Okay.
The problem is a lot of small businesses, they don't necessarily respect how important it is to do that. If you're in a larger company, they've got somebody reminding you all the time. No, don't use your personal credit card. We have a company card. So But so absolutely, you get all those protections.
Yeah, don't fill out things for personal when it's the business. Yep. Okay. Next one, Darren. At what point in our business should we consider switching to an LLC? I'm just getting started and wanted to start out as an LLC, but went with sole proprietorship as legislation allowing for LLC was so new. I'm concerned that the cost associated with recommendation to hire an attorney is cost prohibitive to me. Should I continue as a sole proprietorship until a certain threshold, profit level has been reached, and my business can afford to pay for those fees? Thanks. I'm going to add on to that because I have a question that kind of piggybacks that, because I've had a DBA for a period of time and I am considering going to an LLC. I'm also going to totally switch my name because I want to make a clean cut for my DBA and myself as a sole proprietor. Is that wise?
Well, that's it. I'll start with the first question.
Okay.
I would recommend creating the LLC immediately, from day one. It's part of doing business. So it's kind of like, you want to wait to have a baby when you're ready. You're never ready. Just, if you're going to have a business, then treat it like a business. Do the necessary things to be a professional business. Create the LLC. That's my advice, bar none. You know, I sell $10 bottles of flower essences on Etsy and have since 2014. But the first thing I did was create my business. And then the second part of your question having to do with making a clean break, depending on what your DBA is, you may want to incorporate that, because if you were Jennifer doing business as, you know, Carvino Jams, you might want to say, I'm going to shed that DBA. I'm going to do Carvino Jams LLC, because people are already familiar with you as a sole proprietor, familiar with your product, familiar with that name. You want to maybe capitalize on that.
Okay.
And so there are documents that you can use to give consent to use the name in a DBA, and so you can do that crosswalk. Create that
Okay.
liability protection. Take advantage of the people who know you now under your DBA, and go ahead and shed the sole proprietorship, which is a DBA, and create the LLC.
Fantastic. Here's another question. Does using my personal kitchen and equipment for the LLC create any issues? Is a rental agreement necessary or helpful? Do I have to buy new stuff, or is there nothing to worry about there?
And that is an excellent, excellent question. If I were advising having a lease agreement, absolutely. A lease agreement between your company and yourself is a piece of corporate formality I'd put in place. I am the sole shareholder of Libby Law Office. I also own a real estate company where I am a single member LLC, and I have a lease between the law office and my real estate company, and I pass rent money back and forth, or rent money. So yes, different hats. Where you can show that, you know, today I'm making jam in my kitchen. And so you're going to be wearing the hat of your LLC. You're going to treat the kitchen as a business kitchen that day. Similarly, when you treat it as a cottage food producer kitchen anyway. I mean, but this adds to those corporate formalities. But it's an excellent question. One that will be, if there's not a lot of litigation in the cottage food industry as far as food makers getting sued. But if that happens, that'd be an argument I'd make on the other side. She makes the stuff at home, you know, it's of course it's a personal kitchen. No, here's the lease. It's a professional business arrangement. Under the law, she is an LLC. Under the law, she has created a lease between her company and herself, and that's perfectly legal. Great question.
Yeah, that was a great question. I love that answer. I never even thought about that. And you can ask Shelley. I have come up with some really do's and don'ts, Shelley, for questions. Yep. Okay, I had another person here with a question.
Donna's.
Oh, here's a question that just came up that's the same as, can you recreate a lease and charge yourself $0, LOL? I'm assuming that that would be no, you'd wanted monetary value to it.
Well, you can create a $0 lease. It would be more about, leases have a lot of consideration in them other than money. So for example, Carbono LLC is going to lease to Jennifer, and Jennifer is going to require that Carbono LLC hold her not liable for anything that may happen to Carbono LLC. So sure, you can do a $0 lease, and then put in those other considerations.
Awesome. Here's another question. I have a single member LLC that was created 2 years ago when I was trying to drop ship. Sorry, things kind of move around when we get more questions. The name is DLV Online Concepts LLC, and I have not made any money yet. Can I use the same LLC for my cottage food baking business?
Well, when you filled out the articles of organization, it's going to ask, one of the things that you state on there is the purpose of the organization. If you listed the purpose of the LLC as being any lawful purpose, then you can. If you listed it more specific than that, then you'd have to amend the articles and then you can do it. So the answer is yes.
Okay, here's one for people who rent. Let's say you rent your home or your apartment or your townhome. Are you still able to lease part of your business? Can you release your rental space to your business? Does that make sense? So you're
Yeah.
renting or leasing from somebody else. Can you then take your business and lease from yourself can you sublet it?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Let's see here. I want to make sure I haven't missed any. A lot of great presentation. This is really good information. Lots of that in there. What are some of the mistakes people make when forming an LLC? Just in the formation of, is it just people not having the knowledge to do it? Is that the number one problem?
Yeah, the mistakes aren't going to come probably in the formation of the LLC. Like I said, you can go to the Secretary of State's website and you can use their articles that will meet the minimum legal requirements. So that's not where the problem is going to come in. The problem will come in is once you've created that, what do they mean? How am I supposed to act? What kind of operating agreement am I supposed to have? How am I supposed to do a resolution? Am I an officer? What's an officer? And so that's where the mistakes come. Not in the formation, but not in the creation with the articles, but how you act after that. Again, going back to that is where the attorney will add value because they will talk you through that. What's this mean now? This is what you have to do, and here's your operating agreement, here's your first set of meeting minutes, and then here's what you need to take to the bank to open your account, that type of thing. That's where the mistakes are usually made. Or not even knowing what you don't know. I mean, if you have no idea that you're supposed to do all this stuff, how would you know it? By filling out a form at the Secretary of State's office. That's where the danger lies.
Gotcha. A couple of people here are saying they're maybe calling you, Kirsten. Here's one. What if you make a mistake at some point and pierce the financial veil? Can you correct that somehow?
You can correct it. And if for some reason you can't, let's say you're out and you find just a smoking hot deal on jars, and you forgot your company credit card at home. Oh, forgot, I need these jars. Can I use my personal credit card? I'd say yes, but the first thing you do is then you document that and you write a check back and you pay it back. So most mistakes are addressable. And if I'm looking through your financials and I see 80% of the time you're using personal funds, that's no. What I want you to do is make a loan to the company. So you loan to the company money, you document it. If every once in a while you forget your corporate credit card or your corporate checkbook and you use personal, then pay that back immediately. If 95% of your stuff is done with good corporate formalities, and there's a couple percent where you just grab the wrong credit card or something, that's a lot easier to defend than a constant using of personal stuff in the business.
Okay. Here's a question. Does moving from sole proprietor to LLC affect how you file taxes? Currently, I think it's just one extra form as a sole proprietor. Curious if it's a lot more complicated tax situation.
No. If you move from a sole proprietor to a single member LLC, you're still filing a Schedule C on your personal returns. So it might be an E, I can't remember. It's just a different schedule. So it's the same information, and it's the same amount of work, just a different form with a different name.
Okay. Another question about that, the same one. One person here asks, what do you mean by what?
I had a question.
Go ahead, Shirley.
So there's a lot of people who are just starting out who don't know if they really want to do this as a business. So we always advise everybody that the most important thing, no matter what, is that they get insurance. How much does insurance cover someone?
Well, that would depend on the kind of insurance and what you're doing. So boy, that's not a question I can give you a very good answer to. Insurance is very important. Is it, it goes hand in hand with being a professional.
Shelley, I know I just recently asked my insurance agent that question, being that now that we can become LLCs, and I say that with air quotes because I don't think we needed to pass the law to do that. That's my own little soapbox. But this was the least expensive way to do it. What were you going to say, Kirsten?
I agree with you, Jennifer.
Yes. Yep. We've talked about this long and hard. But what my insurance person just recommended is it's a simple name change, because I've had it in the one, and he said a simple name change will suffice. Just changing it that way. I don't have to take out a whole new policy or anything like that. I can do a simple name change. I'll just, like you said, have to provide all the documentation to them as to what I've done. So I literally just asked that 2 days ago. That's the only reason I know.
And if there is and I don't know if you have on your website, I think you do, resources on, who is interested out there in insuring cottage foods or that type of thing. It's worth talking to a couple different folks and seeing what the costs are.
It really is, because I used my personal insurance, and it was State Farm, and it was a lot more expensive. But we actually have started using Alliance, who actually sponsors our association conference. And it is actually a Minnesota-based insurance company. And they're one of the few that actually deals specifically with cottage foods and understands cottage foods. Because sometimes you have to be really careful too, because some of associations, we're not affiliated with them by any means. And we always suggest that they go on their own and talk to them and check it out. But I know from some policies, you have to be really careful too, because it might be that you're operating at a farmer's market and they'll only allow you to be insured at farmers markets in Minnesota. Well, with cottage foods, you can sell online and all this other types of things. So we direct a lot of people that way just because it's very reasonable. It's like just over $200. My policy was almost identical to what I had with State Farm Insurance. And I can sell across borders if I ever legally can.
Well, and you raise an excellent point. Insurance is very important, but just like any other legal document, know what's in there, know what's covered, and as importantly, know what's excluded. And
exactly.
That is very good point.
Yeah, because we don't know. I ask a lot of questions, almost to the point of annoyance sometimes, right, Shelley? There are a few more. Somebody asked a question, what do you mean by piercing the corporate veil? And that's a great question.
Yep. And I should have backed that up earlier. Piercing the corporate veil is if you consider your individual self on one hand and your company on the other hand, and there is separation between them. There is a veil between them. What you don't want to have happen is that corporate veil get pierced to get at your personal millions.
Yep. Somebody here had a great point on the insurance too. If you are delivering, make sure your car insurance provider agent knows so that you have the right car insurance for that as well.
Yeah.
And we will, the contact information for Alliance Insurance Company will be flipping through, and yes, we will make sure that we'll send all that information out in an email either tonight or tomorrow night. What other questions do we have? I have a feeling, Kirsten, you're going to be inundated with people contacting you.
That's good. That's good. I so think it's an awesome step. Jennifer, I worked with you a little bit on this law passage, and it's a really good opportunity. It's great that the legislature recognized it. I have all the faith in the world that you'll get the egg department where you need them to be. And I welcome the questions. It's part of what I do myself as a lawyer is offering a good public service. And these are important questions. It's important work. And I think that this work is just going to grow food making and food, whether it's farmers markets or people like me. I started out with a wholesaler license and now have a retail license. And so I think it's hugely important, and I welcome questions.
Yeah. And I'm going to put one more plug in for incorporating. The reason I push so hard for it is we worked really, really hard for everything we have. And you think about everything that happens, and we live in Minnesota, and right now we just got back from North Dakota and our driveway is icy as all get up. If somebody would slip and fall on my property, yes, I have homeowners insurance. Yes, I have my business insurance. But my husband also wants to retire by the age 60. It's only a couple of years out. So we've really rat-holed some money away so we can accomplish that and get out of Minnesota during the winter. I don't want to jeopardize our hard work for all these years
And
by not having a business structure and separating my business from my personal.
And that's very true. I mean, one bad case of botulism that ends in death could ruin you personally, and and nobody wants that. But and as far as the cottage food industry goes, it's an awesome industry. My aunt, who lives in Missouri and has also canned since she was born, she can't go to a farmer's market and buy canned goods unless they were canned in a commercial kitchen. So that, hats off to the cottage food. I told her she needed to get Cottage Food National Association down there and start taking care of some of that, because it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to offer.
Okay, on a side note, you need to send me her contact information or give her mine, because we're gonna start a national social hour, at least quarterly, with cottage food producers to really start organizing kind of so that we can help each other on what's been successful in our states and what some of our challenges are. It started out when we were trying to figure out our keynote speaker, and I'm like, wait a minute, last state admitted cottage food, New Jersey. And so when we've been talking, I'm like, you know what we need to start doing? Because we started a little bit last year with Wisconsin, and we all have individual friends throughout the United States. I've been fortunate enough to talk to most every regulatory department for cottage foods in the United States because of our efforts last year. So we've made a lot of great contacts. So why not start contacting people, getting them together, and like New Jersey said, you know, let's focus food safety and let's focus on freedom of choice and economic development and empowerment and advancing it and trying to really, you know, we should be able to choose our own local food sources. And
Absolutely.
the pandemic really showed us how important that is. So, yeah.
Okay,
Yay.
so Kirsten, thank you so much for your time and for all your valuable information. And Jen will be emailing out the more information and how to contact Kirsten.
Yep.
And so
would it be okay if we put you on our website as a resource for cottage food producers, as far as, you know, maybe somebody will want to solicit the services your office has?
Yep, I'd love it.
Fantastic. Yay.
All
all right,
right.
so we have a
Thank you.
break.
Yeah, we have a break. Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a great, take care. Bye.
Bye.
So we have a break until 2:45 if anybody wants to stretch their legs and get another cup of coffee. And then when we get back, we're going to be having some photography lessons.
Yep. And Kirsten, if you're interested, we're having, oh, she's already gone. I was gonna say we're having a social hour tonight. So, being she's a cottage food producer. So, yeah.
All right. See you
Yeah.
back in a little bit. Hey, everybody.
Hello,
Hello. I'm Shelley Erickson.
Shelley. I'm Robert Olding.
It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Jen's told me a lot about you. I'm
Well,
excited.
hopefully, well, I can pass some information off that's helpful to anyone
Yeah.
that needs something today. So,
Your pictures are fabulous. I looked at your website.
thank you.
Is everybody back?
Sorry, I had to share my sandwich with my dog.
All right.
So today we have Robert Olding with us. He is going to talk to us about some photography basics on taking food pictures. And if you looked at the bio that we put up, you see that he's got a lot of, he's had a very interesting life when he does the beautiful pictures. So Robert, I'm going to start recording this.
Okay.
Okay, don't start.
Jennifer
I was
already
gonna say-
did
Oh,
it.
that's right. I was gonna say I want to see the movie you made in Idaho.
Everyone does. Unfortunately, it's still on Super 8 film, and I haven't got anybody to transfer it to digital from me yet. So it's still stuck somewhere. It can only be seen in a private showing on an actual projector screen, I guess you could say. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
But yes, it is funny. I will say that. So,
Okay.
all right. My name's Robert Olding. I'm a photographer here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I've got about 30 years of experience. Most of that has been shooting food and what in the industry called food and booze. So I shoot wine, and a lot of my clients have been wine related and the food related stuff also. So restaurants, magazines, and whatever. For the past 10 years or so, I've been working in-house. Means that I now work for a company. I don't work for myself anymore. And we shoot a much wider variety of clients, but I still do quite a bit of food work. But I just finished up a cookbook here that is supposed to be published sometime in the next 3 or 4 months. And yeah, it's been good. Been a good long career. Anyway, I'm not that familiar with what you guys really need from a photography standpoint. I'm assuming that some of you have product that you probably sell at the markets, and you probably have websites. And sorry, I might get interrupted every once in a while. But anyway, you might have people selling stuff online, and you need photography for that. So hopefully I can kind of help you get through some of what your problems may be, or if you have no experience at all, what you might start looking for when you're trying to shoot something.
Well,
Does that sound correct as far as like my assessment?
yeah,
That's perfect.
yes. Most people have pretty much their cell phone to take
Yeah.
pictures with, and I use my cell phone, and I think I get some pretty good pictures with it.
Yes, you can
But
take
I
really
know
good
that a
pictures.
lot of it has to do with lighting and things like that. So if you could just give some basic
Yeah.
suggestions on how to get the best lighting, how to get the best background,
Yep.
the best way to highlight it to focus
Right.
on the product itself.
All right. So from a camera perspective, your phones are fine, and I use mine quite a bit also. From a lighting standpoint, I'm a big believer. There's a group of us in the industry that are a big believer that the sun is king, and because there's only one sun, you only need one light if you're trying to recreate that sun. And so I don't like it. I don't like photography that goes too overboard and puts too many lights into a set. when you're trying to light up something. It's best if you keep it clean, simple, and use one light source, whether that's a window or what we call practical lights, which would be some sort of lighting that's in your environment somewhere, in your house, your home, or wherever you're at. Even just what we call the ambient light, which is the entire light that comes from any source that might be in a building. And just to keep those things, and then what you really kind of need to do is to essentially just what we call shaping the light. And if you have that light coming in, say from just a window, you might have a really dark side that you might need to what we call shape. You might need to bounce some of that light back with, like, I'll use a sheet sometimes, or a piece of white poster board or foam core, just to bounce it back, to fill in your shadows. I do have some images up on my screen. If I can share my screen, I can kind of talk about some images here that I like.
Yes, you can.
All right, share my screen. Where am I going to hit that button at?
Should be at the bottom.
There, got it there. All right, I'm going to probably choose that one right there. Here at the, choose that this time. Oh, look at that. Zoom wants me to quit and restart in order to share my screen. I might have to just do that quickly. Is that okay if I pop on and pop back off real quick?
Sure.
All right, hang on. I'll be back shortly.
All right.
Zoom's been a little nutty today. Literally at the beginning of the conference, I got this huge error code from Zoom and I thought, oh great, did everybody get it? It knocked me out.
So in the meantime, if you guys have any questions, any specific questions you want to ask, go ahead and put it in the chat so that we can ask Robert when he
Yeah.
gets back.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Zoom's crazy.
Okay. All right, let's share my screen here. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to show you some photos here. This is from one of my favorite food industry related websites, Food 52, which my wife and I get a lot of recipes from when we're making dinner. Anyway, so Food 52 has what I call just beautiful, simple photography. So like this picture you can see here, just a product shot of oil, and it's on a simple surface, just against a wall, and there's one light source coming in. That light source should come from the left side, and it is probably, my guess, we're just going to call it a big window.
Okay.
And it's very simple. It's got dark shadow on the left side, so that shows the shape. You see the shape of the bottles because it's bright on one side, dark on the other. So you understand that just visually that it is a cylinder of some sort. If it was too flat, you wouldn't know if they were actually flat. Next one here. This one is, again, very, very simple. This lighting is kind of coming from all around. I would call it much more ambient. Although I could just tell from looking at it, there is a brighter source coming from the left side of the plates and bowls here, and it's probably what we call filled in and shaped a little bit by some sort of, I'll just call it a white card or a sheet or something coming in from the right side of the screen. And another thing I should say about these images is that they focus really on the subject. The subject fills up the screen, and you can see what you're looking at.
So you keep it simple.
Now this one is a little bit more complicated. It's got the environment more, and you're kind of showing stuff within a setting, say. And again, it's just one light source. It's coming from the left side. It's probably a large window. Like even when I'm at home shooting, I got a big sliding glass door that I'll pull a table right up next to it, and then I'll maybe drop a sheet on the other side of the table, and that kind of bounces the light back onto the other side so the shadows don't get too dark. It just makes it something really, really simple. Don't worry too much about the camera outside of when you're framing stuff. Again, like I said, try and show the subject. If you feel like you have to put, like in this photograph here, where you have to put such as a vase with flowers or plants, you got a table, a chair in the background, you got some glasses of water or some sort of drinks, and then silverware or a tablecloth. Try and keep it simple and keep it neat. And I'll show you, I have an example on here of something that works, that somebody had done, but I don't think really worked out well. Let's see if I can find it here. This one. I like this photograph, but there are some things that I would definitely change. I would get rid of the napkin that the knife is sitting on, and I would put the knife onto the plate just to help simplify things and not overthink it. I also get rid of the orange juice that's up in the top, or the slice of orange or grapefruit that's up there in the top left-hand corner. And then there's, in the very background, there's what I believe is another coffee mug. And then I have the coffee mug cup that you see on the right side, which is a different shape than the other one in the background. I don't know if the one in the background really is a coffee mug. It could be just a container that holds something, but my mind tells me it's a coffee mug. And I believe that most people, if they just looked at it and someone asked you, what is that back there? People would say, oh, it's a coffee mug. Even though you don't see any coffee, you don't see, so I would get rid of the coffee cup on the right side and just leave the other one just as it is, just like that. Just because your brain kind of fills in the parts that it can't figure out. Like, oh yeah, that's a coffee mug back there. So that would be some way to simplify this, rather than have what I call out as sort of competing objects. Everything's trying to get your attention. Even though I like the photograph, I love the lighting. The lighting is beautiful. I would just change a few of the props. Simplify it more. Simple, 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 simple. Keep things simple is the easiest way to go. A lot of times when you're first starting out with photography, you will try and overcomplicate things. And when I started out with photography, I overcomplicated things all the time. And just learning how to keep things simple. Let's see here. Let's take another look here. Again, objects is on a table with a simple background. Now, some of this I'm showing is we'll call them in a white environment. It's just very light or open. It doesn't have to be that way. If you were to add like a color, say if your wall or your table surface was some other color, That's okay. What you would want to stick with is things that are complementary to each other. So say if you're using like a lot of times in we'll use barnwood or something on the surface for a tabletop, give it a rustic look. And I'll put a white background back there just to help keep things simple again. Or say if I have like a colored background, then I'll try and keep the surface something very, very simple. Or if it's two-tone, say if you want to go really colorful, you might go with a sort of a burnt orange, brownish orange background and maybe a yellow surface so that there's complementary colors in those on those surfaces. That also depends on what your product is, whatever it is, if it's a food or if it's something in a jar or glass or whatever your product looks like, as long as it doesn't compete or the other objects in the photograph aren't competing and drawing your attention away from your product, whatever that is. Again, something simple, very, very simple. And I know I'm showing you a lot of simple stuff here, but it's easy to go and it's clean, it's simple, it's easy, people can read it, it's easy to do, it's not hard to create this stuff, and you don't need any special equipment outside of maybe the camera. Or when you're shooting, try and get some sort of tripod if you can, some sort of device that can hold your camera phone, or if you actually do have a camera, some sort of simple device. You don't have to spend too much money on them, and you can pretty much find them all over the internet. Amazon has tons of them. In fact, I think sometimes it's too hard to try and decide which one to get, but they're all pretty good. That way, at least you can keep the device that's taking the picture steady, and you don't have to worry about anything coming blurry or something's moving around. This background is just what we call a sweep. So there's no horizon lines like we saw in the previous photographs where there was like a table against a wall. And a sweep is generally just a large piece of paper that we've rolled out. You know, they're generally about 4 feet wide that we can find. And you roll up, you hang it up whatever way you can, tape it to a wall, and then kind of roll it down onto your tabletop surface. So it creates a horizonless image. The other thing on those other things that you can try and do, things that I actually really like because they're easy to clean up, is just vinyl. If you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever and just get a sheet of vinyl, something that's got a smooth surface, and you can paint it whatever color you want. And they work great, and they last long, and they're easy to clean up. And you can even create a sort of a collection of them, which is nice. And then if they ever get dinged up, you just repaint it. And vinyl works out really, really, really good. The only thing I would avoid if you are going to paint them or use vinyl itself is avoid anything that's too glossy. As the glossy surface will reflect back into the camera, will reflect light back into the camera. It will kind of distract. It will definitely distract and draw the viewer's attention away from the product to, like, what is that glossy bright mark on my wall or tabletop? And again, one light coming from the left, and it's probably filled in from the right side again with either a sheet or a piece of white foam core or poster board or something. Now this, I'm going to get a little more complicated here for those of you who want to try some stuff. The next group of images I'm showing is coming from a photographer called, her name is Maria Robledo. And Maria Robledo has been a photographer maybe about 10 years longer than I have. She's been around about 40 years, but she is really responsible for Martha Stewart. Without Maria shooting for Martha Stewart in the late 80s and the early 90s, there would be no Martha Stewart. Wow. And I mean that. Her photography made Martha Stewart what Martha Stewart is. So Maria still shoots this day. And her work is just very, very inspirational. And we call it, before Maria came along, food photography and food product photography was really sort of bland and boring. Everything was really lit up. It was always overpropped. And it looked like advertising, like some marketing person had gone in and said, well, we got to show every single product that I sell in the photograph, or I got to show every sort of situation that my product might be used in the photograph. And so things were always way too busy and distracting. And it's just funny if you go back and look at like advertising from the sort of the early 70s until the late 80s related to food, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It's ugly. Maria came along and changed the world. She kept things simple. She started throwing backgrounds out of focus. And like down here in this corner with these spoons, you'll see like there's a little drop of water down in here. She likes a messy set. And so in her photographs, she'll typically have some sort of mess just to add a little bit of what we call life to the photograph. And this was something that set her apart and kind of changed the whole food photography industry. I'll go through a few examples. And again, she's simple. It's just one light source coming from one side. And maybe it's possibly, in her particular case, she doesn't really use any sort of fill or backlight to kind of fill in the shadows. Once in a while she will, but most of the time she just lets the darks go dark. And which is good because I think it really leaves the viewer's imagination to fill in the blanks that they can't see. And most of the time a viewer fills it in with what they want to see, even though whether it exists or not in the photograph. And what they want to see is something they usually like. Here's another one of hers. Very simple. She used, I don't know what that background is. It might be a piece of sheet metal, maybe.
That's cool.
You know, very pretty. And she just keeps things simple. This isn't one of Maria's shots, but I like it. And I wanted to show it as another example of like, it's beautiful. It's got too much light, but it's beautiful. So don't ever feel like you can't like overlight something, but the light does come from one source. You can just tell by it's coming from the left side again, and it's cut, and it just wraps around the whole image and fills up the whole frame. There is some shadow, you can tell if you look down at the plums, you can see with the shadow, and even also the dark areas in the napkin there, that there is some shadow coming from it. But it is bright overall, and it's just beautiful.
So what would you suggest somebody who does most of their bakes after dark?
If you're doing after dark, well, now you're going to move into using practicals. The practicals are just any house lights. If you're sitting around, whatever you might have, you could take just a house lamp, and you could probably, if you need to get something that's a little bit more, we'll call it fill the space. Again, you would take like a sheet and put that between your the house lamp and whatever your subject is, so that sheet will fill up with the light coming from the house lamp and kind of broaden a bit, and so it doesn't become too flashlighty. You don't want anything to look too flashlighty because it's too sharp. And then again, you could take another sheet or foam core or poster board and fill it in from the other side. And if you're kind of like, if you want to actually like have sort of night environments, it's good to at least keep things dark in areas where they should be dark. And again, let the viewer's imagination fill in the blanks with what they think they want to see. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well enough?
Yeah, so, and basically you're making your own photo box with.
Yes, essentially, you're only making your own photo box, and really it's just come from one light source. And if you need to, if that light source is too sharp, like a flashlight type light source, or even some house lamps could be too sharp, like a desk lamp would be a little bit too sharp probably.
So a soft light.
If a lampshade, if there's a lamp has a lampshade on it, it's probably going to be okay. But if not, if it looks like it's too, your shadows are too black, or if the shadows are being cast, like if you look at the image I have on my screen, you got the plums down here. The shadows coming from the plums, they're soft, and they got fuzzy edges. If the edges are too sharp, you know that your light's too sharp. So what you would do is then take like a sheet and place that between your subject and the light, and that will just help spread that light off and help soften the shadows out a bit.
Okay. So do you have any suggestions on photographing flat things like chocolate chip cookies?
So flat things. If you want to do like if you're like something like, give me an example of something flat that you're talking about.
Well, for instance, would you just do one chocolate chip cookie, or would you do a pile of chocolate chip cookies?
Personally, I would do a pile. That's what I would do.
That's what I've done too.
I would suggest doing a pile. You just make it look better. I mean, more. I don't want to say more is better, but at least you're presenting something that looks more inviting to the viewer. If you want to just shoot it flat, it's fine, or just one itself. Say if you had a cookie. The other thing is take them. Don't put them in wrappers. Avoid wrappers if you can, especially anything plastic like Saran wrap or anything that looks like that. Just avoid it. If your product does come in a container of some sort, that's okay. But if there's kind of a plasticky look to it, I would definitely take it off. Something that I can only describe as, shrink wrap or some sort of Saran wrap type plastic wrap. It never looks good in a photograph. Never looks good. Yeah. So I would definitely take it off. But say if you were to do an overhead shot, again, you would do the same. You would do exactly the same thing. You would just move your camera overhead. You can leave your lighting exactly the same. It's not really going to change anything. So again, that single source light. So it's really just one light that's lighting your subject, and then bringing in a card of some sort. Again, sheet. Sometimes I've even grabbed a white pillow and just propped it up next to the subject to help kind of kick in some light back to help fill in dark shadows and stuff.
I use wrapping paper a lot.
Yeah, wrapping paper. Yeah, a white box, like a shipping box, like you get from like the post office. Post office boxes they're pretty white and bright. I'll use those. Sometimes it's something that I'll grab. I'm like, I just need something to fill in the light a little bit. I'll do that. Yeah.
So how would you photograph something like jars of salsa?
Pardon?
How would you photograph something like jars of salsa?
Jars of salsa. I would leave them. I would keep them in the jars. If it's I guess it would depend on what your product is. If you can see, if it's in glass, you can see the salsa through the glass. It's fine, like a mason jar. Or if it's in a container that you can't see it, then you might want to leave the container in there. Again, where you're taking like this shot here, where you're seeing everything on the table. You might want to just put a little bit of the product in a bowl of some sort, so that they can see it. If they can't see the product through the container that it's actually sold in.
Okay.
And again, you can do that simple light. So like in this particular thing where the vase it's glass, you can see through it partially, and then it's just lit from one side and then filled in from the other side with a sheet or foam core or poster board of some sort.
Is there a trick to prevent or correct shadows?
Pardon?
Is there a trick to prevent or correct shadows?
To correct the shadows, if you don't want any shadows at all, then that's where you would bring in that what we call the fill card to come in from the other side. So again, the more you can bounce the light back the other direction from where it's coming from, then you'll end up with something that's like more like this thing, these plated bowls here, where it's a lot more open.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way. So coming from that other side, the other side where the light's not shining in, just got to bring that whatever card or whatever device you're using to bounce the light back into the set, essentially back towards where it's coming from. You know. Again, here's another shot that has a lot more going on in it, but it tells a story in this one. This one just tells the story of the bread and the butter and the tea. This is complicated, and it's a really complicated styling job. This is where you're pushing it. This is a shot that would take a while to figure out, and I can tell just by the way it looks that they're really sort of going for what we would call it's a sort of a recreation of what you might see in an old painting, like an old still life painting, but it's taken as a photograph. So, and I highly recommend it. I mean, when I started out my career as a photographer, I thought I was going to be a fashion photographer. Like that's what all photographers are, aren't they? And it wasn't until I took a class with a still life painting instructor. She was teaching photographers on how to do still lifes, and I just fell in love with still lifes, and that's how I ended up going down to food writing. And again, it's like looking at all those sort of still life paintings. They're beautiful, and you can always use them for inspiration. But something like this photograph I have on screen is complicated. Not that it can't be done, but to pull it off really well without distracting your eye is difficult. Again, something simple, but also tells a story just because of the wine bottles back behind it. You could remove those wine bottles, you still got a great shot. Simpler, kind of like this one right here, or you can leave them in. And they're just these simple objects, not cluttering the set too much, that just help tell a story. If you want to just have a product shot, here's your product shot. If you want to tell a story with your product, here's your story. And this is just by adding simple props that kind of relate in some way, or maybe even we'll say either complement or contradictory to your product. Something that gets the viewer to kind of cock their head and wonder what's going on. But at least it just puts gets the viewer's imagination going. You always want to get the viewer's imagination going so that it really gets their interest. That's what makes them stop to think without really even thinking about it. It's just your intuition.
So somebody's asking, what's the best way to avoid light reflections when photographing glass containers?
So when you're doing a glass container, you're always going to have some sort of reflection. There's just no way to get around it. And I'll show you, where am I at? Let's go back to this. So on this pink face here, where you got the left side, where it's pretty lit up, even on the glasses, where you've got the light on those. These are areas, and even if you look at the forks down in the bottom right, what we'll call specular highlights. And you want to have specular highlights. They're bad if they take over your entire photograph or take over your whole product. But if you want to, but you need to have them, or else the viewer doesn't really understand what kind of container it's in. it could be, if it doesn't have enough specularness to it, brightness to it, the viewer might assume it's plastic as opposed to glass. And even in silverware, like the silverware down in here, even though it's a jumble down there, it's lit in a way where the light that's falling on it shows both the dark blacks and the bright highlights that are typical in pieces of metal. Unless so we see your eye sees those things, they just look gray and plasticky. They look like gray plastic. So you got to have like these dark areas and bright areas. Even if it's something you want to show off, like, oh, look how beautiful this is, like if it's a piece of jewelry or again a piece of silverware. It's anything that's sort of made out of metal. Unless you have the bright areas and the dark areas, it doesn't look like metal. It looks like plastic. It's funny, but it's just something you'll learn to do. And again, on glass, if you have something in glass containers, like a jar jam or something, just if you feel like that highlight is too bright, I would take like a sheet and put it between the light source and your subject. So if you're coming from window, you got the window light coming in, then take the sheet next to the window, or maybe move it out a little bit from the window, and then have your subject in the camera frame. And again, you can also experiment by moving that sheet closer or further away from the window or the subject, and see how that highlight reacts to it. And that will help mitigate anything that looks too overdone. When you're taking pictures with your phones or any sort of handheld cameras, not handheld, but sort of consumer cameras, controlling the highlights can be an issue. So you generally want to try and knock them down if you need to with some sort of modifier, a light modifier, which in this particular case, if you were at home, I would just use a sheet to help sort of block how brightness is coming in there.
So let's say somebody's photographing coffee grounds.
Okay.
Are they going to want to show more of the ground coffee? Are they going to want to show the coffee that's brewed with maybe some grounds? Do they want to have a busy background or a simple background?
I'd always, for the background, I always go simple. And again, it depends on what you're showing. If you're showing coffee, I would say that imagine imagine you're your own customer, and what is it that you see? So most of us, when we all recognize coffee beans these days. Most people don't know what they are, or they do know what they are. So if you just showed the beans, it could be as simple as that. People are going to know it's coffee. You could show it ground also, which might be, I guess in my mind now I'm thinking about it, it might not read as coffee as well as just a bean. Does that make a sense?
Yeah.
I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just sort of speculating there.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So if somebody wants to put their coffee beans, set it aside from somebody else's coffee beans, they're going to want to focus on something that is specifically them. Yes.
And then in terms of photography, we're trying to differentiate yourself from your competitor. That's a little more difficult because images are just the way we see photographs and the way we see images related to what next term is graphics or typical marketing thing. So if you're going to, or even some sort of what your copy might say, the copy being whatever you're talking about, the words that you go along with your ad or your images on your website. Those will be the things that help differentiate yourself. Like even like if you look at like the classic Food 52, I mean, almost everything on their website is like this image I have on the screen right now. They do deviate once in a while, but for the longest time, this was their look. It's so simple, it's silly. And they can't really like claim, oh, that's the Food 52 look. You can't really say that because it's just really, really simple. But because of everything else they do on their own website, through the marketing, through the copy, through the graphics, through the way they speak to their viewers, just through the words they present, that's the stuff that helps make them different from their competitors. What helps their photography, because they keep it consistent, helps their viewers or customers recognize that it's them, which is a bigger deal. You really want your customers to keep coming back. You know, I know it's hard to land new customers, but the ones you got, you want to keep them coming back, and you wanted them to be able to promote your to their friends or anybody else that they might want to talk to, or talk about your product to someone else. Then you're getting into marketing. And I can't really speak too much to marketing. I dabble in it just because I'm in that world, but I'm going to call myself somebody that can help sell you.
Here's a quick question from somebody. They say it seems like there's two ways to go: the simple, straightforward product shot. But their thought is, being that we're home cottage food producers,
right?
We may want to appeal to that customer that way. What are some ways that would be most effective that you could balance that simpleness yet tell your story without creating a cluttered image?
Right.
Any ideas for, storytelling, photography?
Again, it would have to come from props, whatever props that you decide to put into the image. To help tell that story. If there's something that's specifically related to your product or you yourself, if you sell yourself as your brand, then I would try and include those. Again, try and keep it simple and not get too cluttered so that it doesn't deviate or from the hero of the image, which is your product. But you might need to, but I would say that using props of some sort. And again, like I said, like a lot of times I'll like in a shot like this that I have on the screen, I'll use a piece of wood for the tabletop, or barnwood or driftwood or something like that, or maybe it might be even a checkered tablecloth. Or some sort of something again that just, it's this little prop that says something about you and your product.
So like if you have a really busy background, you're going to probably want to keep everything else simple.
Yeah, that would be the best thing to do. And also, if you have a really busy background, try and get even closer to your product. Try and get your product to fill up the screen as much as possible. That way it will help separate it from the background, even though that background might still be busy, so that you can, so it stands out against the background.
So that would be the way to highlight your product then?
Yes. Yep.
Instead of everything else in there. Okay.
Yep.
Here's another question. So tips for how to highlight the hero with props, like elevated, centered, etc. Are there any tips you have on how you do that personally? Like, are you moving it around to a certain spot? Are you bringing it up in the photo? Anything like that, I think is what they're asking.
That's all sort of, yes, I do all of that, I should say. Only to find what looks best to me. So again, there's not really any sort of, rule of thumb to really follow. It's just what looks best to you. The only other rule of thumbs that I would say is like highlight the product. Fill the frame as much as you possibly can with the product, especially if it's a simple shot. Again, if you have like a something a little more complicated, like this tabletop setting here, what goes on in that setting is, again, telling the story. What's the story in here? So, like in this particular shot of the pear with the wine bottles in the background. So, you can, whatever the story is, I don't know what it is, but it's something's definitely telling me something's going on. So, and I want to eat that pear. and I did enjoy that glass of wine, even though I didn't drink it. I want to be there. That's what the story. I want to be there to eat that and drink that wine, even though I can't. So.
What is your perspective on food that's been eaten or a bite taken out of it? Take
I love
pictures
it.
of something like that.
I love it. I think it's great. I really encourage people to do that. It shows it in use. I mean, don't be gross. Don't be gross with anything. But I think showing it in use, and like I said with Maria Robledo stuff here, like where I got the water spill down here with these any sort of messiness. It's just life, and people like that. People really respond to like, this is what goes on in the world, and it's not too perfect. It's not too clean. Nothing is perfect. Nothing's horrible. It's just the way it is. So anything that sort of shows life in your photograph is really, really, really helpful. Even if it's just so simple. And again, it could be a trap that most people fall into is overcomplicating it and overstyling. So be careful. You just have to practice.
So people who sprinkle chocolate chips or oats on their table, yay or nay?
Yay! I love it. Like if it's appropriate for the image, and that's what it's whether it's a prop or the product, I say yay.
Okay.
What else? Paris, those are kind of it. Those are kind of what I've got for you today. Is there any other questions? Anything want to know something?
Is there a rule on how many cookies in a picture?
No rule at all. Just, whatever looks best. I will. The only typical rule that we kind of follow is odd numbers. For some reason, even numbers don't really look good to our eye, and no one really knows why. So if you're putting multiple objects in there in your shot, keep the numbers odds. Typically 1, 3, 5, 7, So
I agree with that. Any other questions? Oh, what are some food trends that are coming?
Aha. One that I'm hoping goes away is the overhead shot.
You hope it goes away?
Oh, I hope it goes away.
Why?
It's just my personal opinion. I do not like overhead food photography. Doesn't mean that it's not appropriate at times. In fact, on my own website, I have some overhead shots. But I consider overhead food photography, especially that we see so much of it used commercially, especially in the food magazines these days. I consider it graphic design and not photography. So it's more, and I have nothing against graphic design. I think I love graphic design, but it's really more about the designer and the stylist creating the image rather than the photographer creating the image. So unless there's something about the overhead shot that is really specific, I'm really bored by them. I'm bored. And so, anything that again shows an environment from an angle, like how I would typically, if I was sitting down at a table or standing up and I was looking at what this is that I'm about to eat or buy, that's how I'd like to see it. I understand at times when you need to do an overhead shot, I have to do them. The clients ask me to do them all the time. I always argue with them. I don't think the overhead shot is photographic in nature. That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, I don't really like them either most of the time.
I am really tired of seeing them. I see way too many these days.
But you have to realize that if you are decorating a cake, that most of the picture is on the top of the cake. You have to kind of do an overhead shot.
Yeah, you can still do it at a 3/4 angle though. You can still get up kind of a bit of a higher angle, so you see possibly a horizon line or something else in the environment besides just the overhead.
Yeah, I do that a lot.
So, yeah.
So somebody says, what do you see in a food photo that makes you want to eat it or buy it?
Typically, it's the it's really that thing that's in your imagination that inspires me to like really want to go into it. And like I look at this shot over here, there in the wine. I really want that. Why? I don't know if anybody you else see that, but I see that myself. And again, you don't know what's going to hit. You don't know what's going to stick with someone's, and so you just kind of want to go with what you think feels right to you. And even if it's pushing the envelope a little bit, like even if it's a little weird or funky, that's cool. If it feels right to you and you're like trying to tell a story, start out doing those things, and as you practice, you'll be able to hone your craft. You can get better at it, and you start to feel like you're able to tell your story and people understand it and are listening. That's really what the photograph is all about. It's putting that story in someone's head. So those are the things that get me to want to eat something or buy something that I want to consume.
I think that that a lot of it, one of the good things about using your cell phone is that you're able to take many pictures from different angles and different lightings and different props to see exactly how you want it to look.
Yeah, I mean the handheld devices that let you play around a lot. You can really play around quite a bit and quickly and move quickly to really sort of like see what's going on. When I started out in the industry, I was shooting with large format, which is people don't realize, but most of us, until the digital stuff really took hold in the early mid 2000s, we were all shooting large format cameras. These are the kind of cameras where you got the cloth over your head and you got a big screen, kind of the stuff that what people would call the old time cameras. Those are still in use today, and I used them for 20 years. They're big, bulky, and they don't move. So once you got the camera set up, everything had to be created in front of it. So your view was based on what you were going to put in front of the camera, as opposed to like with the camera phones. You still have your subject, but at least you have a lot more play, and you can take a lot more shots to see what works best and what's as easier to go. So
yeah. Um, Somebody is asking, is there any lighting that you would not recommend?
Not really. I mean, most stuff these days works okay. I mean, if it's a lot of like sort of industrial overhead fluorescent lighting, like you might find in a school cafeteria or like a workroom cafeteria where there's no windows or anything like that, it's probably not the prettiest stuff. And it comes all directly from overhead. And so your shadows don't come from any direction. Like if you were to look at like if you were to even like take an overhead shot of a plate, something on a plate, and your shadows from direct overheads would show a perfect circle kind of around the edges of the whole plate, as opposed to like coming from the side. So there would be one side where there's a shadow cast and the other side where it's bright. So that's generally the ugliest. Not that it's not appropriate at times, but generally in food photography, nah. So.
Mhm. How much editing do you think is necessary in a post?
So is editing, so by that, do you mean choosing your selects or actually going in and retouching?
I'm assuming retouching.
Yeah, so retouching, you don't need to do too much. I mean, the stuff that I typically do is I get rid of like dust spots, pieces of dirt, things like that. Like if you're shooting something that's got a label on it, a label got some smudge or something on it that doesn't look good, those are the sort of things that I'll clean up. And then the other thing I'll do is I will take I'll either like maybe modify the colors a little bit, either make them a little more saturated or a little brighter. Those are things that I'll typically do. It's not, I don't do too much. So the bulk of my time in retouching is spent on sort of cleaning up gunk that I don't like, smudges. There's a smudge on the product. There's something in there that I didn't like, but that's generally about it. So.
Mhm. So it looks like your last question is glove versus ungloved hand when taking photos to sell cookies or cakes. I personally would not want the gloves.
So leaving, I didn't understand the question. Could you repeat it?
Sometimes some of the photos you will see of people taking pictures of their cookies and things, they still have the plastic glove that they used when they were decorating their cookie.
I would, unless it's necessary, like if you're doing like a how-to and here's the best way to do something, then sure. But if you're just trying to show the product, then no. So.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it would depend on what you're doing.
Yeah. Typically, no. It's better to either leave the hand out of the shot, or if you're going to put it in, then I wouldn't use a glove on it. So.
Good. Great. These are all great tips.
All right.
We really appreciate you taking time to be with us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you so
I'm
much.
glad I could come in, and I hope I got some questions answered. If anybody has any questions, just feel free to reach out.
Great.
Fantastic.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
you
much,
answered.
Robert.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you
All right.
answered a lot of questions, a lot of great lighting tips and
Yeah.
things that we can actually use in the house.
Yeah, keep it simple. Simple is best. Yeah, always looks best. All right.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, thanks everybody, and you all have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert.
You're welcome. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.